Hello there. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and this is the Right to Read Initiative, a place where we have conversations with educators about using best practices for teaching our students how to read. Today, I have the joy of having Shawna Wood join me to discuss her journey to the science of reading. She is a grade 1 and grade 2 teacher in Vancouver Island. And today we're focusing on her journey. Tomorrow we're going to look at some of her favorite resources in her classroom. Good day, Shawna. How are you?
I am well. Thanks for having me today.
You're welcome. So can you give everybody a little bit of a background about why you began teaching?
Well, why I began teaching. I think I just always knew I was meant to be a teacher. Even when I did other things, other jobs, I was always the person that would start telling other people what to do. And I'm a very big sister to two very little sister and brother, and I was their primary caregiver in the summers, and I ran school the whole time for those kids. And that I just knew I had a passion for it, and I ended up as a teacher. It's where I meant to be.
Yeah, some people just are so much a teacher from the very beginning. I know my eldest is definitely like that.
Yeah.
And so did you go into your education degree with a bachelor's degree beforehand, or did you do a straight through program?
Yeah, no, I got sidetracked with geography. I did a B.Ed in geography and then did my post degree in education, knowing that was my main goal, but wanted a detour there. And that was, 17. I guess I've been a teacher for about 17 years, so even further behind than that.
So let me ask you this. In your geography degree, did you have any courses on reading instruction?
No.
Or, linguistics?
No.
So you went into your teacher education program without a background on teaching children how to read.
Correct.
Or information about the phonological structure of the spoken English word, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Most teachers don't. That's fine. That's great. That's not expected. Now, did you get it in your teacher education program?
I'm going to say no. I don't remember a lot. I know when we're taking courses, there was a lot of emphasis on picking great picture books to do a fabulous read aloud. I remember a whole course where we pretty much all just demonstrated reading books to the class, like to each other, right? As if we were teaching a class. And that was great. I got some, confidence and all those things. I don't really remember anything about how reading, what the foundations are to reading. How does it develop? How does it happen in the brain? None of that at all. Yeah.
And again, that's common for a lot of teachers, even still today. I mean, I remember doing my teacher education program and the language arts courses. We did literacy circles and everything that you do once a student knows how to read, yes. Right? But there wasn't that critical, how do we get them to read? And now we're realizing, well, that's definitely an important piece to the puzzle that we need to include in our educators, and the Ontario Human Rights Commission Right to Read Public Inquiry Report and its recommendations address that and that need and that missing need from teacher education programs and the need for professional development. Now, did you get this knowledge about the science of reading in the professional development that was offered to you within your district, or is that something that you kind of branched out and did on your own?
Yeah, definitely did it on my own. There was a glimpse of it. I had to look back in my notes, but in 2017, I attended a conference here in Victoria. It was hosted by a local woman, Dr. Janet Mort. She created a framework, a framework for what she called joyful literacy. And it was primarily based on the NELP report. And she really emphasized the importance of phonological awareness. So that was sort of my first introduction to it.
Mm.
And that was something that my district, I think 2 teachers from our school were allowed to go, and my name was drawn. So I got to go to it, and I was really motivated by what I was hearing. I wasn't given any sort of, I didn't walk away with an understanding of why phonological awareness was important. I just sort of felt what I was seeing in my classroom, that there was something missing. And this woman associated with the university, she had some great data to share with us. And I said, okay, I'm going to try that out. And so I did start to implement a slightly more emphasis on phonological awareness at that time. But again, I didn't really understand why. And it was really luck of the draw that I got to attend that. Yeah, so it wasn't until 2020 that I really sought out more information on my own that I started to really learn about science of reading.
So what was that thing that pushed you over the edge to the deep dive? Was it COVID or?
It definitely was COVID, yeah. So obviously that spring, life as we knew it changed. And going into that summer, that first summer of 2020, not really knowing what school was going to look like in September, knowing that we would certainly have some restrictions and guidelines in place. And I was particularly concerned about literacy because the way I had been doing my literacy instruction was a very side-by-side approach. I'm a very organized person, so things were very well organized. Every student had their own book box, and in their book box, everyone had a variety of leveled, predictable text in their boxes. We'd work on stamina and all those kind of things so that the students would be able to sit and read silently for about 20 minutes. Well, I went around and sat side by side with each student as best as I could and did a little bit of side-by-side coaching, some incidental kind of teaching at those individual desks in those moments. And knowing COVID was happening, I felt, I don't know if I'm going to even be allowed to approach a student that closely. So I really had to look at how was I going to be teaching literacy and what would be most effective, knowing that they'd be coming back with gaps in their knowledge. And I'd have to make, every minute was going to count. I had to make sure that what I was doing was really impactful.
Mm.
I also, a learning support teacher that I had worked with here at the school, oh gosh, probably 7 or 6 years. Her and I had worked closely for years, and we had a really good system, and we were in a groove, and we just did the same thing over and over and over. And that year, that June of 2020, she left our school. So that was a little bit of a shakeup for me. That thought, okay, well, with COVID, with her leaving, I get to really re-examine how I do things.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that summer we weren't really going many places. So I love podcasts. If I've got any housework to do, I'm going to seek out a true crime podcast and listen to that. So that summer, I just, luck of the draw, I just searched literacy podcasts and stumbled almost immediately onto Emily Hanford's work, and ended up just connecting with what I was hearing. It was just making so much sense to me. And I'm pausing that podcast to like jot notes down, and then that just let me down. I just started looking into other avenues. And at this point, I think my favorite are the Amplify podcast and the podcast by the Reading League. Those two, they have such fabulous guests. They have researchers. They've got really big names in the world of academics, in the world of the science of reading, from such a wide variety of genres too, or disciplines, I should say, not genres. And from there, just being introduced to names like Anita Archer and David Kilpatrick, I just really felt like this is the key that has been missing. And then the podcast led me into webinars, probably, the webinars by Really Great Reading, even just a YouTube search. Once I, through those podcasts, learning of some of the more prominent researchers, I could just Google their names and find a couple YouTube talks with them David Kilpatrick talking about heart word method, or, there's so many great things to see that way through YouTube. Tools for reading, I think you go to YouTube and look them up. They've got great, like an hour long on using sound walls. So there was a wealth of information, luckily, because we still had the internet if we couldn't go anywhere. And that was really my introduction that summer.
Now, were you still at the 1-2 level at that point?
Yes. Yeah.
So to put that in context, in British Columbia, where we are, you were going to get students from kindergarten who missed 3 months of school.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and those last 3 months at kindergarten are where they make big strides.
Yeah.
So you're getting these students that, are not having that solid foundation. So where did you start?
Well, day one really was some assessments. I needed to find out what they knew. So even just starting with some of their alphabetic knowledge, can they name all the letters? Do they know all their sounds? And that was the same for my grade 1s and my grade 2s. Looking there. And then I did do some phonological awareness assessments. Just, did they understand rhyme? Could they tell me the initial sound or the medial or the final sound of a word? I wasn't expecting them to be able to figure out syllables quite yet. So I wasn't quite that far into it, but that gave me a good starting point for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so with that assessment, you were able to inform your practices. And how did it go that first year of kind of using what you learned in the summer through the COVID binging and well, I can't go anywhere or see anyone. So what else am I going to do? Right.
Yeah. So I think I was still taking baby steps. It was still all new to me. I didn't want to throw everything out quite yet. So I was still using leveled books, except for my most vulnerable learners, my students that were at the most risk. I started those ones off with decodable books once they had learned all their letters and their letter sounds. So for that, there would have been a lot more hands-on stuff, I had a lot of different activities for those students. But as they showed more progress, I started them on the decodables, whether it was passages or books. Whereas all my other students, even if they weren't at grade level yet, I still stuck with the leveled predictable text because that's what I knew. But the change I made was a lot more explicit instruction regarding my phonics. And I was incorporating a lot of the Heggerty, the drills from Heggerty. So I wasn't able to purchase the manual, but if you download their free sample, that is a very, very comprehensive and rich free sample. That got me, that lasted me quite a while. And that got me I was able to really develop a strong foundation of phonological skills in my classroom using that resource. And then, like I said, in addition to that, I was working a lot on some explicit instruction on those foundational skills, on those skill-based learning regarding, your phonics stuff. I wasn't necessarily following a scope and sequence yet, but I was being quite explicit. There's a lot of review built in. There was a lot of hands-on work, and I was really trying to connect it to my word work. So whatever skill I was teaching, I was connecting that to my word work, my reading practice. So that, like I said, they still had level books, but maybe they would have a decodable passage to go with whatever skill I was teaching. And I would even try and tie it in a little bit with the phonological awareness as well. And just those small steps that I was making, those small changes, even that I was finding their foundational skills, their confidence was really increasing. And just their understanding that there's logic to what they're doing. It's not a mystery. You don't have to guess at the words. And halfway through the year, we would joke about that. Like, that was so funny. We don't guess at words. We don't have to look at a picture. Like, they thought that was hilarious. Whereas in years past, I would have praised them. Good for you. You looked at the picture. They really became very curious about words and dissected the words. They were taking more notice of it. And I think even just those small shifts I was making was quite impactful for them. And those students that had really shown a lot of difficulty at the beginning of the year, I'm not going to say they didn't necessarily meet grade level by the end of the year, but they were developing their skills, and I was pleased with what they were showing me. And I do very clearly remember one of the students that I had on decodable books, and it was laborious all year long for him to slog through those. And then probably June, I introduced a leveled book to him, and he was flying along in this leveled book, and he was so proud of himself that he was reading, but it just hit me in the heart that I realized, you're not reading. This is just the appearance of reading.
Yeah.
And this current September did not let my kids touch leveled books because of that. Like, I knew in that moment, I'm like, wow, you can barely get through a decodable book, and here you are just flying almost fluently through a book with a word merry-go-round or something like that in a level 6. That's not reading, that's the appearance of reading.
Yeah.
So that was a big shock for me.
Well, and I love how open and honest you are being about your journey, because it's really important for teachers to hear that, and realizing that people have this, oh my goodness, is this what I've been doing?
Yeah.
And you're not the only teacher that's had that experience, I can promise you. And once you sit down and get there, it's just like, oh, okay, well, what am I going to do next? But the other issue is the amount of resources it takes.
Yes.
And I'm sure you can relate to that, because if your book room is full of leveled literacy books, where are you going to get the decodable ones? And yes, there are a lot of online decodable books out there and free ones, but there's something about having a hard copy book in kids' hands that's different.
And that's why that particular student who I had on decodables, he wanted the glossy, pretty leveled book. All I had was black and white paper print-offs that I had, and he was saying, I want one of those books. And I'm not going to deny a child a book, but at the same time, it also wasn't the right book. It wasn't. And in addition, like you're saying, yes, there's the resources, but there's also the teacher knowledge. I really, as much as I'm saying I was doing some explicit teaching of phonics, but I was really having to learn it as I went. I did not learn that way when I was probably right on the cusp between the whole language and the balanced literacy when I was a student. I didn't learn all those generalizations when I was a student. And there was a lot of, oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know about an open syllable. There was a lot of learning that I had to do before I could teach my students. But in some ways, learning it with them or alongside of them, I was so excited by what I was learning that I think they were just eating up all my excitement too. So it went well. Yeah.
Well, and that's where programs like Haggerty can be very helpful for teachers. And I know it's one that has got some negative attention on social media, but the important thing to remember, like you said yourself, you didn't have a linguistics background. And you didn't have that instruction before you were a teacher and during your teacher education training. And phonological awareness and phonemic awareness is not something that you pick up overnight. It's a skill that takes a lot of practice, and coming up with those examples takes a long time. So having that resource to reference and be able to work off is nice, and it helps you and ensures that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
And there are some of those tricky words that segmenting into phonemes, you're like, is that 3 or 4 phonemes?
Yes.
And the difficulty that I've seen when it comes to learning about phonemic awareness as a reader, as a fluent reader who has these words orthographically mapped in your head, you picture the word, and then you see the grapheme phoneme correspondence for the individual letters, not considering the digraphs. So if you're thinking the word like chin, it would be k, n. But it really is ch, n. But until you train yourself out of that, just picturing the word in your head, it's easy to fall into that trap. So having the reference in front of you is helpful.
Yeah, like I said, I learned a lot. There was a lot of aha moments of, oh, that makes so much sense. So that was I think that's a really important piece to this is my own knowledge had to increase. Now, luckily, I had a lot of fun learning it. I quite enjoyed learning it, but it was overwhelming at first. It was a lot to know.
It is. Now, so that first year of kind of doing that deep dive into science of reading, so that was last year's class, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So what did you do over summer of 2021 to make it so this year's class would have that different experience?
There was a lot more learning, more podcasts, more webinars, but I was just eating it up. I was really enjoying learning what I was learning, and I spent a bit more money, purchased a few books. So one of the books that really helped with my own knowledge was Uncovering the Logic of English.
Yes.
Denise I love this book and I recommend it to so many people. I've had many colleagues borrow it at this point, and we've purchased a copy for our school library. I referenced that book. I learned a lot from that book. Like I said, I look back at that book because learning it once or reading it once doesn't necessarily commit it to memory. So
and that book has so many aha moments. I have the digital version of it through Kindle, and it has you can turn on the highlights of the most highlighted sections.
Oh yeah.
And of course I read it and like I go through and highlight it myself, but I'm like, oh yeah, this is what everybody else is highlighting too. Like this is one of those big concepts that's important to have. And I think, once you read something like that, you're not just telling your students, oh, it's spelled that way just because you just have to learn it.
Yeah.
And was that a transition for you going from, like, did you use Dolch words before?
Yes.
And how are you approaching that now?
Yeah, so I had been using the Dolch words, lots of memorizing, lots of frustration. And going back to that September 2020, I actually took my Dolch word list and spent, I don't know, an hour or more reorganizing the whole list. So I wasn't looking at it as the pre-primer, the primer, all those, the way they have it organized. I reorganized it by skill. I have since learned that you can find copies of that on the internet. But to be honest, doing the work myself was probably a really good exercise because I really took a look at those words. And I organized them by short vowels and digraphs and R controlled, all the different skills, right? As best that I could. And then that September 2020, when I was I have the words on cards and they're on little rings, I was introducing them in a skill-based progression. And all of a sudden, my frustration was going away because you didn't just have to memorize the string of letters. There was some logic to it. So that was a big shift for me. And I still have them organized by groupings like that, but I don't rely on them that much anymore like I used to. Like this year, I haven't relied too much on them. But yeah, that was a bit of a shift too.
I mean, how did you find the success of your students teaching them based on skills versus here's a list of 20 words, you have to memorize them?
Yeah, I think we were, both them and me were a lot happier. We were, they felt more successful. I felt more successful. And I look back at the kids that I remember sitting side by side with their ring of words in the order that the Dolch words come in. So those first, 10, I think blue is one of the first 10 words. That is not appropriate. Yet if is in the grade 3 list. It makes no sense. So I remember sitting with students going, like saying, oh, we'll sound it out. And then I'm in my head going, okay, well, that's not going to work. Just memorize it. You're just going to have to memorize it, honey. Like, so anyways, it was really good for the kids and good for me too.
That's amazing. So we've gone to going from a Dolch sight word to learning them more how they actually sound, and so they can phonetically sound it out. And how did you do your phonics program?
So for this school year, starting in September, I did have more of a scope and sequence. And I looked at a variety of different ones out there, and I just sort of, I consulted with my current learning support teacher and decided on a track that I was going to go down. And from there, just because I was so much more knowledgeable about the skills, I felt just a lot better doing it. So I try and incorporate some phonological awareness. So let's say I'm doing, I used R controlled vowels earlier. So let's say I'm doing R controlled vowels. I might do some phonological awareness that incorporates R controlled vowels before we even look at the print. So I'm really trying to attune their hearing to it and to identify where they're hearing that sound. And maybe a sort, like an AR versus an OR sort, so that they can really attend to that. But then I would have some word work related to that. So whether that was word chaining, or we just have whiteboards. I love my little mini whiteboards. Every student has one, and we just call it write and wipe. So they'll just write a word down. I can quickly see that everyone's done it. They wipe it away. We do the next one. They love that. But then attached to that would be maybe some word mapping with the same skill. There would be, but then it would also be connected to our reading. So there would be a decodable passage, a decodable book. I'm trying to find lots of different ways, obviously, to review the same skill, and in following a scope and sequence now.
Right. Now, there's all sorts of talk about the problem with phonics programs, drill and kill, but it sounds like your students are really engaged and enjoying the progress.
Yes. Yeah, luckily I haven't seen that at all. I'm finding that they are engaged, they're curious. Like I said, they're word detectives. And a common thing I'll do when we introduce a new topic, I'll use the R control vowel again, on a big piece of chart paper. I'll write down, once we've learned them all, but let's say we've got our AR or OR, and then the other three that all sound the same, I'll have them written on a big piece of chart paper. And as they're reading any sort of book that they're reading, any sort of activity that we're doing, if they see that word, they add it to the chart. They are so motivated to do that. They love recording it because they found it in their environmental print, and that it's just helping them notice the words around them too. Yeah, anytime I've heard people say that phonics is boring, I think, oh, you need to come watch my class. They're so engaged. I don't experience that at all.
That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned that there are a couple books that you really enjoy. So Uncovering the Logic of English.
That was my main one.
Yeah.
And then equally important would be David Kilpatrick's Equipped for Reading Success. Love this one, love the past assessment. I use the past assessment. And then the second half of the book, and this is why I don't rely on Hegarty as much this year, partly because my knowledge has increased, but also attached to the past test that he has in here are the 1-minute activities. And they are really, really good activities. And you can divide your students out based on their outcomes from the past test. The activities are leveled essentially, so that you can find the right activity for the right skill set. So yeah, I like this one a lot. And there's a lot of great information, orthographic mapping, and just the value of being able to manipulate phonemes and delete, substitute, all those good things. And then another Kilpatrick book also I really enjoyed was The Essentials of Assessing, Preventing, Overcoming Reading Difficulties. That was another really good one. It's a little bit more dense. I would say the Equipped for Reading Success is an easier start for most classroom teachers. This one is definitely a heavier read, but a good one. And Wiley Blevins is A Fresh Look at Phonics. That one I really enjoyed. Also a pretty easy one with some good practical advice for the classroom. and then the good old speech to print, which is very dense and full of rich information, but it's one you're going to want to take your time with for sure.
Yeah. And what I like about the books that you've just spoken about is there's some at the various different levels. So, that first starting out are the ones that you mentioned. I definitely like the first two that you brought up, which are the Uncovering the Logic of English. That's a fairly easy read that's going to be full of those aha moments that even a teacher who's not ready to discuss the science of reading, but just wants to learn more about the English language would be okay with reading.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a great toe in the water first step to understanding how our language works, because with that understanding, you're not just saying, oh, it's spelled that way because.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can give them a reason. And kids hate hearing because I had said so, unless they're telling it to you.
Yeah. I spent years saying, oh, that's a rule breaker.
Yeah.
But I didn't even know what the rule was really.
Yeah. And then the Equipped for Reading Success. Again, the past screening assessment is a free assessment that is available. There are a lot of tools and a lot of resources. And there are so many webinars and YouTube videos of Dr. David Kilpatrick's talking about this stuff for you to reference and take more information from. The Louisa Moats's book, Speech to Print, is a great book, but that's where it gets more detailed. Yeah. And that's not one that's great for just, fresh looking at this stuff, because it goes into some of the more complex things, looking at articulatory gestures. So that's what shape your mouth makes when you are pronouncing these sounds. And one concept, I can't remember if it's in Kilpatrick's book or not, but it's talking about minimal pairs. And that is, I think, an essential skill for any, or an essential idea or concept for any primary school teacher to understand. And minimal pairs are sounds that have the same articulatory gesture. So your face, your mouth, your lips are making the same shape. The only difference is the voiced or the unvoiced. So how much force you're putting in making the sound. Well, that may be like, okay, well, yeah, sure, that's kind of neat. But where it really comes in helpful is when you look at young children's spelling and noticing when they can't tell the difference between a k and a g. So you see the C or the K mixed up with a G. And you're like, well, that's not phonetic. What are you talking about? Then, well, it kind of is, because they're just not noticing the difference. And the best way to go about helping that student is drawing their attention to it.
Yeah. I learned a lot through watching webinars about sound walls. And that's, and I ended up making my own sound wall because I wasn't quite happy with a lot that I was seeing online that I could purchase. And it's invaluable now that I know that information, and now that I can talk to kids about that and talk about the, your voice is on or off and all those things. It's again, another aha moment. So valuable. Definitely.
So how are others in your school responding to that? Like, are you talking about it with your colleagues? Is it something that your school's starting to make the shift, or are you that lone wolf?
Yeah, this year it's been great. Unfortunately, we have a lot of staff turnover at our school. So we will be starting a little bit from square one again next September. But yeah, I've got, our ELL teacher, our English language teacher, our learning support teacher. They're both fully on board. And as they both support my class, that's important, because I don't want to be teaching them one thing in the classroom and sending them away to hear something different when they leave the classroom. But I also, I've got quite a few teachers in the school who maybe haven't implemented it fully, but are curious about it, are asking questions, and are hoping to start implementing a bit more. And then, so there's a few people on different steps of the ladder for sure, but we've even tried to host a few after school sessions, just like come and chat if you're interested, and do a little session on decodable books and what are they, and moving beyond some of the maybe stereotypes you've had in the past. So it's been good. Yeah, I don't feel quite as alone as I used to.
That's great. And, teaching can be a very lonely profession, and making any change is difficult, but especially when you're the only one. So it's great that we have these communities that are helping each other along the way. Now, this process of going from like a balanced literacy teaching strategy to a structured literacy, or one that aligns with the science of reading, it's not something that's done overnight. So do you have any ideas or books that are just waiting to dive into this summer?
Ooh, well, I've got a few on my list. Reading for Life by Lynn Stone is something I'm hoping to read this summer.
Mhm.
And then Christopher Such, I think is his last
Yeah.
name, The Art and Science of Teaching Primary Reading. I
Mhm.
think that's the title. So those two are waiting for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and Patent Literacy just finished doing a book study for the art and science of teaching
Oh, really?
primary reading, and those are all archived.
Oh, I'll have to look for those. Yeah.
So you can watch those, and recognizing that there's so much to learn. I've been doing this science of reading stuff for a while now, and I still have all these books that I want to read and things that I want, because it is a rabbit hole that you go down. But seeing the differences and understanding the changes, and even some of these books that you've mentioned, reading them a second, third, and fourth time, sometimes just that much more that you take out of them
Absolutely.
is incredible. Do you already have ideas for what you're going to do differently next year?
I think at this point, what I need to do is fine tune what I've been doing.
Mhm.
This year I have felt quite good about it, but I can already see how things might be smoother next year, a little bit more integrated next year. Tying in, I didn't feel that I quite mastered tying in my heart word instruction with it wasn't quite complementary to my other phonics instruction. So moving towards that a bit more. But I think I'm on the right path for sure. It's just needing to get a little bit more experience.
And that's where the importance of being able and having the flexibility to stay in your grade range is really important as an educator, because if you're always jumping around from grade to grade, then you don't have that opportunity to hone in your skill.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Shawna. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I can't wait to see more inside of your classrooms, aside from the beautiful backdrop you have there. And looking about the different activities that you use, and how you've created your sound wall.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.